bienvenidos, hello, and welcome. Welcome to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church. We are a liberal religious community where love works, where we gather together to explore the eternal, to nurture community and build a more just world. I am the Reverend Katie Romano Griffin, your assistant minister, and it is great to be with you today.
I'm Tim Atkins, your Director of Lifespan Religious Education, and good morning. If you are new to Cedar Lane, we have a small gift for you. Please raise your hand and keep it raised for a moment so our ushers can find you. And please join us after the service for coffee and conversation. If you choose the yellow mug, our members and friends will be sure to greet you.
Please know that whoever you are, wherever you are from, whomever you love, whatever your sexual orientation or gender identity, wherever you are on this life's journey, and whatever your beliefs, life circumstance, or immigration status, you are welcome here. In this caring community, the pastoral visitors are an extension of the ministerial team. Bob Harrison is today's pastoral visitor. Bob is by the Joys and Sorrows candles. Please feel free to visit with Bob, or if any of our other pastoral visitors want to raise their hands, I think we've got Kathleen Holme and Tim Persons and Janelle Stewart. Please feel free to visit with a pastoral visitor if anything in today or another day's service brings up some emotions or feelings for you. The team is here to support you.
Now let us turn our hearts and minds to the service with the prelude.
As Candace Hodges, Peggy Jackson, and Fred Bowman come forward to kindle the chalice, please rise in body or in spirit to share in unison the words printed in your order of celebration. All right. We pause this morning from the chaos of the world to reclaim the beauty within these walls that carry us through our week. Let us lift this community onto our shoulders with pride and grace, build expectations for our lives, for the children of the world, and for their children. All right, please remain standing for the next song.
Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. And I know you might have a heavy load, but I can carry some too. I will lift you up when we put you down. I will raise my voice and stand my ground. Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. And it looks like it might be a long night, but I ain't going nowhere. And I know it's gonna be a hard fight, but I will stay right here. I will shine a light in the darkest hour. I will raise the man in the tallest tower. It looks like it might be a long night, but I ain't going nowhere. I will work, I will fight, I will strive in the name of love. I will speak, I will shout, I will sing it from the stars above. Well, it looks like it might be a perilous climb, but I will follow your lead. And I know it might be a long time, the last one of us is free, but I will hold on tight, stay by your side. I will be with you for this whole damn ride. Well, it looks like it might be a perilous climb, but I will follow your lead. Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. And I know you might have a heavy load, but I can carry some too. I will lift you up when they push you down. I will raise my voice and stand my ground. Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. I'm gonna walk it with you. I will walk, I will climb, shine my light all night through, because it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you.
Come, wanderer, come, worshiper. Come with your joys, your broken heart, your wholeness, and your loneliness. We gather as a single community in sacred space to meet the wonders and challenges life offers us all. Let us enter this time to gather strength and inspiration as we bear witness to the joys and sorrows in our community. Last time I was up here, I made a mistake and told you all to do this. Ow, you don't have to. That's my job. When I hold up my arms, I invite you to say,
We hold you in our hearts.
if you're living through the small and extraordinary milestones of life,
We hold you in our hearts.
if you're living through the small and extraordinary milestones of life,
We hold you in our hearts.
if parenting is your spiritual practice,
We hold you in our hearts.
if you live with or care for someone with grief or chronic pain,
We hold you in our hearts.
if you're struggling with mental illnesses seen and unseen, we hold you in our hearts. If you've suffered abuse or injustice.
Behold you in our hearts.
Usha Charya's elder sister passed away recently in Dallas.
We hold you in our hearts.
Vicky Strella's dad passed away last week. Please hold Vicky and Paul in your thoughts.
We hold you in our hearts.
And we hold in our hearts longtime member Phil Brown's wife, Barbara. Phil passed away on Saturday after a battle with cancer. His memorial service will be at Cedar Lane on September 29th.
We hold you in our hearts.
And we're happy to announce that Sarah Davidson's boys are doing much better. Thanks so much for the calls and cards.
We hold you in our hearts. Let us settle into a space of relaxation, meditation, or silence. Just begin by noticing your breath. Beginning, maybe if you're comfortable, to close your outer eye and open your inner eye. Turn it towards the area of your heart and just breathe. And as your attention flows to the area of your heart consistently beating, begin to turn your mind back to a time in your life when you felt love, the unconditional kind, maybe from a pet or a mentor, or maybe just standing out under the stars. I invite you to connect with that memory, connect with the love. And just imagine it growing with the beat of your heart. And as we enter a moment of silence together, aware of our hearts beating and the memories we're holding of unconditional love, I invite those who are mourning the loss of a loved one or the anniversary of a loss to rise in body or spirit. Let us hold the silence together in unconditional love. May all be free from suffering. May all know peace. May all know love. Amen. And blessed be. More love somewhere. Maria Luisa, or Malu, as she sometimes calls herself, is the protagonist in the book The First Rule of Punk, which catalogs her struggle with her identity, how she relates to the world, and how the world relates to Malu based on her identities. Malu's dad is a white, punk rock-loving record store owner. He's a fun guy. Her mom is a super smart, fiercely amazing Mexican college professor who Malu describes as super Mexican. Malu loves Lola Beltran, The Brat, which is a Chicano punk band, and the Ramones. Malu is a vegetarian concert t-shirt and Converse sneaker-wearing, punk rock-loving, biracial youth trying to find her way, not just in the world, but back to her true self, because the first rule of punk is be yourself. Malu describes herself as sometimes brave, sometimes scared and unsure, a half-Mexican girl who hates cilantro, struggles with Espanol, and is still learning her culture. How do you describe yourself? Please rise in body or spirit as we sing together hymn number 123. The words are printed on the back of the order of celebration. We are singing in Spanish and in English. Our Universalist theology teaches us that we are created from original blessing. We are created in the biblical image and likeness of the holy and contain within us that spark of love and blessing. Our modern interpretation of this concept reveals itself in our first principle. Each person has inherent worth and dignity. And in theory, this inherent worth, this special spark within us, works on us and calls us to be more loving, more faithful, and to grow. I struggle with how we live into the phrase, the inherent worth and dignity of all beings. when the practice of living into the idea can keep us stuck in individualistic thinking, looking at individual units of humanity instead of the plurality of all beings. It's important to see both the individual and the plural together, not just in separate principles, but in the same one. Father Richard Rohr describes the divine spark in a slightly different way, one that makes space for the individual and the plural. He refers back to the book of Genesis as well, calling it the image and likeness of God, and Rohr uses a fidget spinner to describe his metaphor. Has anyone seen those? They're this three-pronged apparatus you can hold in your hand, and when it's still, you can see the separate prongs. But when you spin it, the three separate things become one, kind of like the blades on a fan that's spinning really quickly. Rohr explains that when you see that static spinner, you see the diversity of what he calls God's creations. When you see it in movement, it's the holy diversity become one. Rohr states it's that dynamism for growth and infinite wisdom that keeps spinning within us and within all creation, calling us to grow in faith, hope, and love. This is our original blessing. What I love about Rohr's interpretation is that it helps us understand the importance of knowing that we're not just static beings, not static representations of the holy, but dynamic, always in relationship with other beings. Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs, calls us to do theological work within ourselves, among each other, and beyond these walls. That's another trinity that as a Unitarian, I can get behind. For me, these three ideas make up the prongs of Father Rohr's holy fidget spinner. Reverend Eller Isaacs addresses the three prongs and dynamism in a way that makes it possible for Unitarian Universalists to live intentional lives rooted in our faith traditions theology. But before we spin, we must begin to do our work within, to aim to understand our spiritual histories, personal histories, and our own identity formation. Then we go and do work among. We explore and relate to each other in our services, in Soul Matters groups, in committee meetings, and the like. Our work beyond is how we collectively do theological work locally and globally, as both static prongs on the metaphorical spinner and dynamic expressions of the holy. And the invitation is to not just spin towards infinity, but also to pause and reflect, to do that responsible search for truth and meaning. This is another one of our principles. When I reflect on my within work, I hold on to the first rule of punk: be yourself. And then I close my eyes and do a spiritual inventory. How are you? How have you arrived at this place in your life, in your faith journey? Do you know how your personal life has influenced how you think about and experience religion at this place and time? In today's meditation, we delved into that feeling of being connected to unconditional love. When I do my inventory, that's the space I find. Sometimes it's really hard to get at, but I eventually get back to there, and I think it's because growing up, I felt deeply connected to love, and my sense of the holy is directly related to both sides of my wild, loud, incredibly loving family. They taught me that there would always be someone to hold me in life, not make things better or go away, but hold me as I worked through life. Their love created a framework within me to believe that there was an ever-present holy something as a life companion. And sometimes when I was away from them, it was a found family, one that I created, or one that adopted me into their midst. My family has also broken my heart and tested me, and this too has shaped me in my understanding of God. Like Malou from the first rule of punk, I've been deeply influenced by my struggle with identity. As a young child, I remember crying at night as I fought to figure out if I was a Romano or a Casabene. My dad's family, the Romanos, hail from outside of Rome, but they've been in this country since the turn of the 20th century, which is a big deal because compared to my mom's family, which isn't even completely in the US, it's huge. I think I was 18 before I met a friend's grandmother who spoke English, and I was like, whoa, your grandmother speaks English? What's that like? On my mom's side, her father and many of my family members came to this country from Argentina. We also have Middle Eastern, Sicilian, and African heritage on that side of the family. And I wondered how I fit into the world with each of these identities. And as an adult, I understand the question I was really asking is not, am I a Romano or a Casabene, but am I white or not? And how do I fit into this world? And some key formative moments on this journey occurred when I was about 7. Every Sunday, the Romanos got together without fail at my Aunt Marianne and Uncle Jim's house for Sunday dinner. I mean, there would be like 30 or so of us there, and you never knew who was going to be in town and drop in. It was complete chaos. As kids, we were rolling around on my Uncle Jim's perfectly manicured lawn, chasing lightning bugs or swimming in the pool. And the adults were always together in the screen room watching on. But one Sunday, a cousin of my dad's shouted to my parents about me, yelling loudly, "Keep that kid out of the sun," she said, and followed that with a racial slur referencing my mixed heritage. An aunt of mine yelled back, "Leave the kid alone." The retort was insufficient in providing me support, and I was hurt deeply. I felt like there was something wrong with me, something fundamental, and I wondered if my family didn't love me, if anyone would. I went home that night and scrubbed my skin raw, trying to get my brownness out. I wanted to be a Romano. I wanted to be loved and fit in. And this is one of the ways that internalized oppression shows up. A few months after that incident, I took my very first standardized test. And while the test said it was optional to identify your race, our teacher said it was mandatory. The choices back then, to date myself, were white, African American, Asian, or other. I felt frozen as I faced down those boxes and didn't want to leave out a part of my heritage. But I also didn't feel like any of those boxes were exactly me, so I checked other. But the act of checking other made me feel more alone than when I was standing outside that screened-in porch. When I talked to my mom later that afternoon, I finally let the tears fall, the ones I wouldn't show in school. And she said, I did the right thing, which confirmed one of my biggest concerns. I was an other. I loved both sides of my family. I loved and respected my ancestors, and it created a war inside of me with fears that I was inherently wrong and wouldn't have a place in this world. And these fears were confirmed time and again while I waited at the kitchen table as a teenager for my brother to come home after he was pulled into a police lineup because the police were cracking down on Latino gangs. It was confirmed when I was followed by security in the grocery store or in the drugstore, but my white friends who were shoplifting were not. When I think back on that moment of awakening and the many moments afterwards when I was called to try to identify myself based on someone else's boxes, I feel the bumps on that old scar. I also think about our beloved trans and gender non-binary siblings who still face forms with boxes that do not have choices for them. It's hard to know your place in the world when the world labels you as other or doesn't even try to label you, which implicitly can feel like you don't exist. Have you had an experience like this, where you felt excluded from the world based on key parts of your identity? Maybe it was because you didn't have the right family connections, you weren't from the right school, you were too blue-collar, too white-collar, too attractive, not attractive enough, didn't have the right religion. Maybe it was your weight, your ability, chronic physical or mental illness. These kinds of exclusions can cause us to feel like we don't belong on this earth, or that we're somehow less than others. They seek to separate us from ourselves, from our divine and holy spark, from others in the world. Left unchecked, this can lead to severe depression, anxiety, self-harming behaviors, isolation, self-medication with substances, food, even Netflix, social media, or other things that cause us to withdraw from life. Understanding the source of our separateness, our disconnection from ourselves and the world, and what is holy can help us to have clues on how we can also reconnect. Religare, the root word for religion, means, loosely translated, to bind together or to bind back upon. Our Unitarian Universalist religion can help us remember ourselves and bind us back together, to come back to the knowing that we are born of original blessing. We have inherent worth and dignity, and the people, the world, which may seem to be excluding us, is also made up with very fallible people just like us. And each is being called to greater love. Each is being called to remember that we are made for love, made to spin dynamically as an expression of something wonderful. For we are, each and every one of us, wonderful expressions of the holy, whether or not there is a box yet for us to check. Malu's struggle to reconcile the parts of herself into a single whole and claim space in a world that wanted to put her in a place of its deciding speaks to me. I think maybe it can be a metaphor for us all, because there are many types of separating oppression, so many boxes created and so many boxes that have not been created. But not only can we be whole, there is within each of us an untouchable, perfect wholeness, something we might not always feel but was gifted to us when we were born, our original blessing. And our Unitarian Universalist religion can bind us back to that original glowing self. I am a person of color. I am culturally Latina and Italian. My biological ancestors have gifted me with multiracial DNA that is Middle East Asian, Italian, Greek, African, and South Asian Indian. I am a pagan Unitarian Universalist who grew up Christo-pagan, Catholic, and Episcopalian. I talk with my hands. My mom can dance the tango like a superstar. I am not great at it, but I love it, even when I stumble. And even though my family is famous for doing amazing things with meat, I'm still vegan. I make a fiercely awesome flan and can crush lasagna, even though I don't eat them. My Spanish is a work in progress. I sometimes speak Spanish and Italian at the same time and have no idea what the difference is. I love concert t-shirts, the Ramones, and listen to Latinx radio stations when I'm not listening to my iTunes tracks. Like Malou, I sometimes wear Converse sneakers and t-shirts. They're among my favorite things. I'm a wife, a daughter, a mom, your minister. I'm not a box. You're not a box. You cannot define me, and I cannot define you. We are each spinning, dynamic beings in relationship to something larger, and we are whole. And we are bound together by something mysterious, something made holy by the essence that is us. We are the original blessing.
Well, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. Well, it's gone on far too long. Well, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Well, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. Well, it's gone on far too long. Well, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Well, somebody's poisoning our water, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. Well, it's gone on far too long. Well, somebody's poisoning our water, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Somebody wants to build that wall, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. Well, it's gone on far too long. Somebody wants to build that wall, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. No, we won't be silent anymore. No, we won't be silent anymore.
Somebody is hurting my people in this room. Some of us are hurting because we live in a world that excludes us, boxes us in, or boxes us out. My nieces and nephews were here a couple of weeks ago when I was on study leave, and we played this card game I've never played before, and honestly, I can't even remember the name of it because it was so complicated. And my niece Katie, when she explained it to me, said, "There are rules for this game, but the only rule I can tell you is the object is to get rid of all of your cards. I can't tell you what the other rules are, but each time you make a mistake or break a rule, you have to grab a card. And if you win the game, it gets better. You get to make up a new rule, but you don't have to tell anyone what the rule is." Yeah, everyone else has to figure it out as they play. Can you imagine the disaster I was at playing this game? It took me several rounds to figure out the basic rules and how it applied to me. Once I did, they kept getting changed by players who knew the game and the rules better than I did. And then they continued to change those rules to suit themselves. Does this sound familiar? Right? Which makes it a good metaphor for living life in a world where the people in power get to make the rules, decide the language of the game, they control the game, how we talk about the game, and they continue to change it to suit their own needs. They're playing to win, and people across the world, as well as the planet herself, are suffering with each hand that's dealt. What does it mean to live in a dynamic world that may or may not be designed to honor your inherent worth and dignity, that of others, or the planet? How do we, with deep understanding of how our personal identities connect to this great cultural game that has very real, painful life and death consequences, seek to help call the world towards being more just? How do we communicate with our spark of love and life, the holy within, the spark of love for others, to create this world for everyone, when we may not even know the same language as the creators in this real life or death game? DC poet Dan Vera has Cuban ancestry but grew up in a largely Mexican-American community in Dallas. And his poetry speaks to how he and his family have navigated life where they're speaking the same language, but maybe the words don't mean the same things. In his poem, The Tower of Babel, he addresses this expertly. Exegesis of a funny story, in which my father asked for change being menudo for Cubans, menudo being tripe soup for Mexicans. It's 1966 in Dallas, Texas. My father makes his request to the owner of a Mexican restaurant, who is delighted to comply and asks how much menudo he'd like. My father replies, $5 worth. This is 1966, and the owner asks if my father brought a container to carry home $5 worth. Considering it a joke, my father smiles and replies, "I'll carry it in my hand." Thinking of the gallons, the owner is not amused and insists on a container, and then the shouting commences. Neither man can be convinced he's not dealing with a fool. My father keeps going, pointing to his palm. The owner keeps making the shape of a vessel, and they grow angrier at each other until finally one of my father's friends rescues him from the exchange, takes him aside, and explains the difference. When I think about how we as a congregation do our theological work among, I think about how our individual understandings of words that are used are different, and how that leads to discord. And it also influences how we do or do not engage in the work within and beyond our walls. For instance, each Sunday, the person doing the welcome recites our mission and vision. Cedar Lane is a community where love works, where we gather together to explore the eternal, nurture community, and build a more just world. It's awesome. But how's love working at Cedar Lane? And what does it mean when we say love works? There's an infinite number of understandings of this phrase based on the many identities we bring to this community. And I want to look at two of them. Some of us might feel like love isn't working at Cedar Lane because we've struggled with variations of the use of the words white, cis, hetero, patriarchal supremacy. and feel that they've excluded us from community. Because when we hear these words, we think of people who are white supremacists. Some of these people might even be in our families, and they've intentionally hurt people. But we've marched and petitioned and protested for equal rights or equal marriage, and we know we're not that. So when we identify as white and hear those words, we might feel excluded and like love isn't working at Cedar Lane. Because maybe what we're hearing is that our box doesn't matter because it's white, and we just want everyone to get along in beloved community. Now, for some of us, when we hear love works, we delight in our work around dismantling white, cis, hetero-patriarchal supremacy culture. We view the dominant culture as a predatory game that began before we were born, one that has privileged the game creators and those who were born into knowing the rules of the game, and were given the tools to create new rules that suit them. We don't hate the players. We seek to dismantle the game and replace it with something new. Sometimes it's hurtful to hear that people who've been privileged in the game feel threatened by our wanting to have a seat at the table and finally get dealt in. We know there's room for everyone. We don't want to take anyone's seat or tell anyone to go away. We want to play together equally, and instead of playing to win, play for the sake of playing. Play to create joy and beloved community. To us, this is how love works at Cedar Lane. The sad thing is, we're not all in conversation. Some of us are fighting upon the altar of our different understandings, locked in a battle of $5 of change versus gallons of tripe soup. We're battling with whether love is working in our misunderstanding of each other or if it's absent in this misunderstanding. And we're waiting for a third party, a divine interrupter that shows up as a friend to bind us together again in understanding. Our Unitarian Universalist faith is that divine interrupter. Our shared theology of hope, love, and original blessing can hold us even when it seems like our differences are insurmountable. And our 7 principles are there to help guide us. In situations of misunderstanding, I often hold on to not only the first principle of inherent worth and dignity, but also the second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to growth in our congregations. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning, our fourth principle, is also key in this work. How can we use these as a guide to intervene when we disagree with someone? How can they lead us from fighting over the game currently in play that started long before any of us were here to co-creating a new one that has space for everyone and can save each of us and our planet? If we seek to co-create a game, one that is just, we must first commit to staying in the game as we create the new rules. Because once we leave, everyone loses. Second, we must accept that we're approaching the game with different experiences, different language and understanding of language. And we also will have to give some of ourselves in order to create something new. We must accept and encourage each other as we both create and play the game, and then continuously, responsibly, check in individually and collectively to see if the game still holds truth and meaning for everyone who's playing. The work of love is rarely easy, and it's never done. It's always in process, discovering itself in new ways. And our religious tradition also teaches us this. We talk about this expansion in ways like, we draw from many sources, recognizing that there is truth in all. We might say that God continues to covenant and re-covenant with humanity. We might say that truth is continuously revealed, or that revelation is not sealed. However we name this dynamism, this great mystery of life, the result is that we need to play this game religiously, as in acting in a way that rises up from our shared faith tradition, while continuing to explore the game's rules, its impact on us, as well as the other players in the world. And we must work with others to change the rules in ways that create more love as we strive to keep the game working for all. This is what creating and living in a beloved community can look like. Part of our religious call is to do this work in the world. It's part of how we play this holy game. It is a spoke on the spinner. We don't just get to play it as solitaire or with a few others or a few hundred, as the case may be on Sundays. We must also play it in the workplace, on the streets of DC, in the larger world, and with every group we meet with. And as we meet with these new groups, we might notice that we have more differing opinions, and the rules might need to shift just a little bit. But how we play the game religiously can guide us in those circumstances too, especially when we're trying to navigate those different understandings. We can stay in the game, try to encourage deeper understanding of ourselves and others, honor the inherent worth and dignity of the players, and move in ways that's good for the gamers and everyone else. But how do we hold on to our religion when some people continue to play to win for themselves? When instead of playing to keep on playing with fair rules for all, they want to take it all? What does it mean to do social justice work religiously as Unitarian Universalists in a world that is not just? And how do we keep our spirits up when it seems like we're getting hit with bad news from every direction? Wesley Lowery and Kevin Stankiewicz wrote an article for the New York Times called "My Demons Won Today: Ohio Activist Suicide Spotlights Depression Among Black Lives Matter Activists." This article puts a spotlight on 23-year-old Black Lives Matter activist Marshawn McCarroll, who completed suicide on the State House steps. The authors interviewed friends and fellow activists at McCarroll's vigil. Many reported how their work was hard and isolating. It caused them to continuously face the microaggressions and injustices present in the way our current society functions. Many were feeling hopeless, powerless, and alone. I've heard similar statements from environmental activists, immigration activists, human rights activists, LGBTQIA+ activists, you name an activist, and they will express these feelings at one point or another. I see heads nodding, so I'm guessing some of you have felt this too. I've also heard increased frustration with people on the other side of some of these debates. Dehumanizing of others as the work is done, increased fear, anger, and a desire to harm ourselves or others often bubbles up in crises like these. These feelings are human, they are natural, and they are serious. They are a part of a larger process that can color the real-life, high-stakes experience. They don't need to define it, nor do they need to become dangerous. We can use them to galvanize us in a way that helps us change the way the cultural game is played, or they can cause us to leave it, to close off, to harm ourselves or others with destructive behaviors. But when we do social justice work religiously, as in conducting ourselves in a way that is grounded with our faith community, we act in a way that is consistent with our beliefs and also in a way that has us pulling on others for support. We're connected to other game players, their inherent worth and dignity, and also our own divine spark. It's a hopeful space to move from. It is sustainable to stay in conversation with ideas that people express and continue to find common ground and a common place to meet with each other so that love can reveal itself through this high-stakes game in a way that honors all, including us. Here's an example, a concrete example of how love can win in this beyond work. 2 years ago at General Assembly in Ohio, was anyone there with me? I see a couple of hands, yeah. 2 years ago at our gathering, our once-a-year gathering of Unitarian Universalists from across the nation, where we come together to vote and express our faith, to have great conversations and decide on the direction of our free association, a radical group decided to protest us. They don't like UUs as a general rule. And this multi-generational group of people gathered outside the convention center, and I'm telling you, people of all ages hollered hateful, terrible microaggressions at our people. They targeted our LGBTQIA+ siblings, people of color, our values, our principles, our persons. Some of our youth donned angel wings that were sent to us by a group that wore them to protect and hold space after the Pulse shootings. They used these angel wings to create a boundary of love. And because it was a hot day, some of our youth crossed that boundary with their hands, holding bottles of water that they gave the protesters. Our youth embodied what it means to do social justice when a group or a person hates you for who you are. They set a healthy boundary. They made it clear that it's not okay. Then they sought to find a commonality, a way to move across our differences and connect from a shared space of one of our identities. And in this case, it was the human need for water on a hot day. Those offerings of water were filled with liquid hope and possibility that one day, connected by our humanness, we can be in the game together in a way that generates more love. This act of our religion profoundly affected me, and I carry it with me at all social justice actions. And I carry it me within these walls, too, as a reminder when conflict reveals itself. How will this story influence how you live your faith, how you experience your own heart as you explore your identity, how you explore how you connect with the congregation and beyond these walls? And as you do this work, may you remember the first rule of punk: be yourself. May you remember your own worth and dignity is ever dynamic, calling you to hope and love. May you draw strength from the process created by Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs and realize that you are doing work within yourself, among your religious community and beyond it. And may that process bind you to religious community in a way that helps you remember your divine inheritance when times are tough. May you seek to answer deep spiritual questions and search for that deeper truth and meaning. You are not alone. Amen. And blessed be.
So twice a month, our generous community seeks to really live out its mission to build a more just world by sharing its financial gifts with a nonprofit organization that is congruent with our values. This week, we're going to be sharing the plate with Casa de Maryland. CASA is an immigrant advocacy and assistance organization focused on changing lives by providing critical services such as English classes, legal services, workforce development, health services, educational programs, and other important immigrant integration services to thousands of low-income immigrants it serves across the region. Founded in 1985, CASA aims to address the root causes of the inequities faced by low-income immigrants by operating direct service programs and promoting grassroots movements through which affected individuals advocate on behalf of themselves and their communities. CASA's mission is to create a more just society by building power and improving the quality of life in the working class and immigrant communities. Donations support or direct services we provide, as well as as organizing and advocacy efforts that promote social justice. We invite everyone to learn more at www.wearecasa.org. You may place your offering gift in the plate or text to donate CLUUC plus the dollar amount to the number 73256. You can see your insert for more information on texting that. Thank you for your generous support, and today's offering will now be given and received. Thank you.
For the gifts we have given and for the gifts we receive, we offer our deep gratitude as we travel this road together. Please stand in body and or spirit to sing hymn number 1018. 1018. Come and go with me from the Teal hymnal.
No, we're actually...
It says the wrong thing.
That's okay. We are going to sing together hymn number 118. That's probably my fault, old draft. This Little Light of Mine. We're going to sing it in Spanish and in English. Rock it out. As you go forward into this week to make peace, remember the first rule of punk. Be yourself. Let your light shine and let it reach out to make the light of others brighter still. Blessed be. Amen.